You wake up with a surge of clarity. A specific idea takes hold. For a moment, your energy feels limitless. But then you pause. You decide to set the impulse aside. You tell yourself it isn't the right time. Within an hour, a strange heaviness settles in. The inspiration is gone, replaced by a fatigue that sleep cannot fix. Have you ever noticed this sudden drop in your vital force? Most people assume they are simply tired from a long day. They believe energy is something we use up through effort. But the reality is often the exact opposite. This exhaustion isn't coming from what you did, it is coming from what you chose not to do. You are witnessing a specific mechanical shift in your reality. We often treat our energy levels like a battery that simply runs dry through physical labor. We look for external causes for our fatigue: a poor night's sleep, a stressful meeting, or a long commute. But this doesn't explain those specific moments when we feel exhausted despite doing nothing at all. You might notice this pattern during a quiet afternoon. A creative spark arrives, a sudden urge to go somewhere, or a clear idea for a project. Yet, for reasons that seem practical, you choose to ignore it. Almost instantly, the world feels heavier. The room seems dimmer. Even your physical movements feel sluggish. This is where the pattern becomes interesting. It suggests that our vitality is not a fixed resource, but a response to how we handle our impulses.
Most of us have overlooked the fact that this fatigue isn't a sign to rest. It is a sign that we have disconnected from a source of movement that was already trying to happen. Understanding why this shift occurs changes everything about how we navigate our day. Stay with me, because the mechanism behind this is far simpler than most people imagine. We often label these shifts as good days or bad luck. On some days, you feel a natural momentum. You make a small decision to act on a whim, and suddenly the right person calls. The information you need appears on a screen just as you think of it. Everything feels light. But then the pattern shifts. You encounter a moment of clear inspiration, a spark, and you choose to suppress it. You decide to be responsible or practical instead. Within minutes, the synchronicities stop. The world feels dense again. You start dropping things. You misplace your keys. Small, annoying obstacles appear out of nowhere. This is the strange consistency many people notice but rarely question. We assume these are isolated incidents of clumsiness or bad timing, but if you look closer, the repetition begins to reveal something deeper. The friction always seems to follow the moment you turned away from your excitement. Have you ever noticed how quickly the flow can disappear the second you negotiate with your intuition? This isn't a series of coincidences. It is a repeating cycle.
The pattern suggests that your external reality is reacting to an internal pulse you've decided to ignore. The reason for this sudden drop in energy is simpler than most people expect. We have been taught to view excitement as a fleeting emotion, a byproduct of good news, or a temporary surge of dopamine. But what if we looked at it differently? In this teaching, excitement is not an emotion. It is a literal frequency. It is the resonance of your true nature communicating through your physical body. This is where the experience begins to make sense. When you feel that spark, you are essentially tuning in to a version of yourself that is highly energized and aligned. But the moment you ignore that impulse, you create a frequency mismatch. You are essentially trying to run a high-voltage current through a closed circuit. The exhaustion you feel isn't because you lack energy. It is the physical sensation of the resistance you are putting up against your own natural flow. This reveals something important about how reality works. Your energy levels are not determined by your physical effort. They are determined by your degree of alignment. Suddenly, the pattern becomes easier to understand. The fatigue is simply the signal that you have stopped being yourself. The reason the flow disappears the moment you ignore the signal is because of a hidden rule governing your perception. Think of your consciousness like a radio receiver.
Your excitement is not just a feeling. It is the specific frequency of the station you are trying to hear. When you act on that excitement, you are perfectly tuned in. The signal is clear and the energy flows through the device without effort. But the moment you hesitate or dismiss the impulse, you are effectively turning the dial. You have moved your internal state away from the broadcast. This is the hidden rule behind the experience. You are still trying to listen to the music, but you are now tuned to the static in between stations. This explains why the pattern behaves this way. The heaviness you feel is the friction of being out of tune with your own life. This mechanism has been operating quietly in your background since the day you were born, influencing every decision and every outcome. When you are aligned, the engine runs cool. When you resist, the engine begins to overheat. Suddenly, the shift begins to make sense. Your drop in energy isn't a lack of power. It is the sound of your system struggling to operate on a frequency that doesn't belong to you. If the mechanism is so simple, why do we find it so difficult to follow? Most of us have been taught to mistake caution for intelligence and resistance for maturity. When that spark of excitement arrives, the mind immediately begins to perform a calculation. It looks for guarantees. It asks for a 5-year plan.
This is the moment the inner voice begins to argue, convincing you that your inspiration is actually an interruption to your real responsibilities. We talk ourselves out of the signal because we are addicted to the illusion of control. We fear that if we follow a feeling that has no roadmap, we might lose our way. But notice what happens when you prioritize this safety over your excitement. The responsible path you choose starts to feel like a heavy burden. This is where many of us lose the signal. We believe we are being practical, but we are actually disconnecting the power source. How many times has caution silenced the signal of your own excitement? If you have experienced moments like this, I invite you to share your reflection in the comments. Recognizing this pattern is the first step toward reclaiming the flow that was never actually gone. To move back into alignment, you don't need a massive life change. You simply need a new way to navigate the next 5 minutes. The process begins the moment you notice a spark of interest, no matter how small it seems. First, identify the option available to you right now that contains even a tiny bit more excitement than any other. Second, act on that excitement to the best of your ability. Third, follow that path until you can take it no further. This is how the signal becomes action. The key is to do this with curiosity rather than pressure.
If you find yourself worrying about where the path leads, you have stepped back into the frequency of resistance. By releasing the need for a specific outcome, you allow the mechanism to work without friction. This is where the navigation begins. Every time you choose the excited option over the habitual one, you are retuning your internal radio. You are proving to your own biology that you are ready for more energy. If this perspective resonates with you, consider subscribing for more explorations like this. Following the signal is a skill, and like any skill, it grows stronger the more you choose to use it. The change rarely starts with something dramatic. It usually begins in the quiet gaps of an ordinary afternoon. Imagine you are sitting at your desk, feeling that familiar heavy fatigue. Suddenly, you have a small impulse to look up a topic you haven't thought about in years. Your mind tells you it's a distraction, but this time you follow the signal. You spend 10 minutes reading, and within that text, you find a specific phrase that perfectly solves a problem you've been struggling with all week. Suddenly, the heaviness in your chest lifts. Your physical energy returns. This is often how the shift begins. By following a tiny thread of curiosity, you re-engaged the circuit. You might have already experienced similar moments without realizing their significance, dismissing them as mere coincidences. But these aren't accidents.
They are the physical evidence of your frequency realigning with your reality. How many times has a small decision changed the entire direction of your day? The signal is always there, waiting in the simplest choices. It doesn't require a new life. It only requires your permission to follow the spark that is already present. This changes the way we understand the experience of being alive. When we look at the mechanics of energy and resistance, we begin to see that we are not merely participants in a fixed world. We are active tuners of our own experience. Suddenly, the pattern reveals a deeper meaning. The fatigue you feel when ignoring an impulse isn't just a personal inconvenience. It is the friction of resisting a version of reality that is trying to manifest through you. This suggests something remarkable about the nature of existence. Could these signals be guiding us toward versions of ourselves we have not yet explored? Perhaps the life you seek is not something you have to build from scratch, but a frequency you have to match. Every spark of excitement is a literal bridge to a parallel possibility. When you choose to ignore that spark, you aren't just staying still. You are actively turning away from a specific trajectory of your own evolution. You may already be standing at the threshold of this realization in your own life, noticing that your world is far more responsive than you once believed. Reality is not a solid wall.
It is a series of infinite channels, and your excitement is the only dial you have ever needed to turn. Perhaps the signal has been there all along, waiting in the periphery of your awareness. The drop in energy you once feared is not an enemy to be fought, but a compassionate guide reminding you of your own power. Sometimes the shift begins simply by noticing the moments where you have chosen comfort over resonance. As you move through the next few hours, pay attention to the subtle impulses that arise. You may notice something new in your life after hearing this idea, a small pattern or a quiet synchronicity that you previously overlooked. How might your experience change if you began listening more closely to the spark instead of the doubt? The journey toward alignment is not a destination, but a continuous series of small, honest choices. The next chapter of this exploration reveals the deeper mechanics behind how these internal signals actually shape the physical world around you.